The Star Wars universe is absolutely massive, with various movies, novels, games, comics, and so much more telling unique, interconnected stories that span hundreds and sometimes thousands of years. When Disney took over the franchise, they made an official announcement in 2014 that the previous continuity of books, titled Legends, would be discontinued and that a new single continuity would be established. This statement first focused on the legacy of Star Wars, mentioning the tiered canon system that Legends used to operate under, with it saying, "While Lucasfilm always strived to keep the stories created for the EU consistent with our film and television content, as well as internally consistent, Lucas always made it clear that he was not beholden to the EU. He set the films he created as canon." It then continues saying, "Now with an exciting future filled with the new cinematic installments of Star Wars, all aspects of Star Wars storytelling moving forward will be connected." Under Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy's direction, the company for the first time ever has formed a story group to oversee and coordinate all Star Wars creative development. "We have an unprecedented slate of new Star Wars entertainment on the horizon," said Kennedy. "We're set to bring Star Wars back to the big screen and continue the adventure through the games, books, comics, and new formats that are just emerging. This future of interconnected storytelling will allow fans to explore the galaxy in ways never before seen." This statement, and many others like it, were informing fans that the old system would be scrapped and a new single interconnected universe would be created under the Lucasfilm story group. These words, being one of the first major moves Disney made since purchasing the franchise, served as a promise to fans: don't worry, anything you invest into, whether that be financially through buying products or emotionally by getting attached to characters, will matter and will be connected to other parts of the overall timeline. Over the years, however, this promise has been broken time and time again. Existing storylines have been scrapped in favor of someone else's ideas, established events have been retread with conflicting information, and worst of all, some people's work, almost in their entirety, have been discarded by the higher-ups in charge of Star Wars storytelling, making the money fans spent essentially worth nothing. This video will take you through some of the biggest instances of this problem, and I've categorized them into 6 main rules that almost seem like a code to live by. Follow them if you wish to survive the mess that is Star Wars canon. Number 1. If Filoni didn't write it, it didn't happen. Dave Filoni constantly overwrites or sometimes even completely rewrites stories that other people have told. He eagerly retcons anything about his characters because he is omnipotent since he made them. He doesn't seem to believe that anyone has the right to tell his stories when he should be doing it instead. A perfect example of this is what happened recently with Asajj Ventress. Despite Ventress being dead for months with her body held at the Jedi Temple in the canon novel Dark Disciple, she's somehow either been revived or had her death retconned years later in the timeline in The Bad Batch, where she shows up perfectly healthy. There's also the Ahsoka novel, which over the years has been almost entirely replaced with Dave Filoni's whims and desires. There's a decent list of retcons just for this book alone, such as what Ahsoka's wearing, her saber color, things said in her and Anakin's last moments together, many of the details of the Siege of Mandalore, as well as her life in hiding when she's hunted by an Inquisitor. However, to save some time, we're going to hone in on some of the biggest changes made to the story. So in the novel, Ahsoka lures Maul into a trap, capturing him in only a few moments, using her intellect to seduce her opponent. In Season 7 of the Clone Wars, of course, they instead have a very drawn-out fight. The fight is sick, but this change really comes from the setup to the event. In the novel, Anakin warns Ahsoka that Maul is crafty and has no mercy in him at all. This leads to her planning a way to avoid a difficult and potentially life-threatening head-on battle, and instead devising a scheme to capture him without incident. In the show, Anakin basically just gives her retcon sabers and wishes her good luck, which leads to their duel. Good heartfelt advice and strategy was replaced with a flashy fight to get ratings up and make fans hyped. After this, in the novel, Order 66 was executed and the clones suddenly turned on Ahsoka as the battle was still raging all around Mandalore. Maul, with his own evil schemes, used the confusion to escape, and Ahsoka chose to save Rex rather than kill Maul. Rex, who had already removed his chip by himself before the siege, likely after a deep investigation into Five's death and what he had discovered, stood by Ahsoka, protecting her from the onslaught of clones who attempted to kill them both. They faked their deaths and went their separate ways. That last line is just about the only similarity that the show gave any thought to. Ahsoka captures Maul in a rather silly way during their fight, and they leave Mandalore to transport their prisoner back to Coruscant. As they're on their way back, Order 66 is executed and the entire crew of the ship turns against Ahsoka, including Rex. Severely limiting his connection to Fives in comparison to the novel, the show stops him from having acted upon Fives' death and instead makes him complicit in Order 66. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how much this absolutely destroys what Rex says in Rebels, and kinda destroys his little redemption kind of arc with Kanan when Kanan goes to his walker. It's then Ahsoka who uses Five's legacy, albeit through Rex's prompting, to save her dear friend. Although I hate this change, you can still argue that despite the differences, major progression was made in the story either way, so fine, whatever. The two of them then battle their way through the ship, where Maul gets in a shuttle and tries to escape, where Ahsoka tries to stop him with the Force. The clones injure Rex and begin to surround the pair, so Ahsoka lets Maul go and swaps her priority to defending Rex. At first glance, it looks like they kept the same general concept from the book, but they actually didn't. Ahsoka makes it very clear in the book that she could have killed Maul, but chose to save her friend Rex instead. In the show, she tries to kill him, fails, and then tries to stop him from leaving, which is when she then chooses to save Rex. Maul fought her off with nothing but the Force, and she failed to kill him with her two lightsabers. This not only makes her look incompetent, but it also entirely misses the character development from the book of literally having the certain and concrete opportunity to end one of the galaxy's greatest threats, but choosing to save her loyal friend instead. Now, moving to a comparison of the novel to the more recent Tales of the Jedi series, we see more significant changes in the story. Episode 6 is intended to portray the events of the Ahsoka novel, except, well, no it isn't. You see, the novel is an official production based on a very rough and basic outline that Filoni came up with, so for whatever reason, he based the episode off this outline as well, instead of the book that the outline was created for and developed into. He based it off the more primitive version of the already developed content that existed. That is just weird. Ashley Eckstein, the voice of Ahsoka, said in an interview, "No, we didn't have any conversations about the novel." Dave Filoni has also said, "It's based on the same outline I gave publishing for the novel. It was always the same story, since it's always the same story." You might be confused as to why this is in the video you're watching. Well friends, sit back and enjoy the ride. The locations that the episode and novel take part in are clearly different. The novel takes place on Rada, a farmer-controlled moon that has only one single settlement. In the episode, however, Ahsoka is on a trip to another settlement to sell the harvest. This is why she's late to the scene where the Inquisitor arrives. Well, in the episode he's nameless, but the novel refers to him as the Sixth Brother. Looking at the supplementary materials for the Star Wars timeline, we only see the appearances for the Sixth Brother in Ahsoka and the Darth Vader comic series. A book that came out after this in 2023 describes the Sixth Brother as he appeared in the Ahsoka novel rather than the show, which means that despite Dave's claim, there are clearly two different stories happening here, to the extent that there appear to be two separate and unique characters. Unfortunately, quite a few unique characters and subplots from the novel are entirely left out of the episode due to its length, and there's a significant issue when it comes to Bail Organa's appearance. In the book, R2 brings Ahsoka and Bail together around a year after Order 66, and they're both equally shocked that they're each alive, with Bail unknowingly trying to recruit Ahsoka to play a role in the Rebel Alliance. In the show, it seems that they meet much earlier and under insanely different circumstances. This is another case of the outline of the story taking precedence over the actual story itself, as it was already told by the novel. Filoni has zero respect for what other writers build with his characters. On top of this is the infamous Canon comic debacle, where Dave took a significant part of that comic and completely rewrote it, something deeply disrespectful since the writer of that comic was actually one of the writers on the Star Wars Rebels TV show, something Dave was extremely involved with. So he doesn't even respect the storylines created by his own peers who work with him directly on the same shows. This becomes worse when you realize that an entire character's arc was removed from Dave's version of events, with him merging two characters into one, leaving that entire story behind for good, despite it being one of the most impactful parts of the comic. And you might be wondering, why am I blaming Dave for this when there were other writers in the Bad Batch and Dave barely had a role in the Bad Batch? Well, where the retcon happened was episode 1 of season 1, and that is the only episode of the entire series, all 3 seasons, that Dave Filoni wrote and directed. So this one is on Dave. There are many more cases of this, as mentioned earlier, but if we went into them all, this video would be hours and hours long, so let's move on to the next rule. Number 2, even if Filoni did write it, it still didn't happen. He contradicts his own storylines without a care in the world. Remember earlier I mentioned Tales of the Jedi retconning things from the Ahsoka novel? Well, guess what? Dave Filoni has actually retconned his own work as well. From the Clone Wars, episode 5 of Tales of the Jedi features Jesse wearing unpainted armor when it should be painted based on the episode of the Clone Wars which took place earlier. Obi-Wan has a hairstyle which also doesn't match his in the Clone Wars, Anakin's hair has the same story, and Ahsoka wears various outfits which give the impression of taking place at different time periods based on her TCW appearances, but some of these simply don't match. Dave doesn't even pay attention to the timelines or continuity of his own work, let alone that of others. In episode 5 of The Mandalorian's first season, Fennec Shand was shot and left for dead, and it ends off with a cliffhanger of a stranger approaching her while their boots spur and a dark cape or skirt-like cloak flows from their back. The internet erupted. Clearly this is Boba Fett. Later on, in the Book of Boba Fett, it was confirmed that Boba saved Fennec Shand, except, wait a minute, where are his boots with spurs? The audio is completely different in this clip. It's probably just an audio error, right? Someone forgot to add it in? Well, that's what I thought too, but when watching the clip of episode 5 a few times, I realized enhancing the shot reveals a unique design which has Boba's armor. Not only that, but we clearly see a light colored boot and a holster on his side. And it's very hard to make out, but it definitely looks like there's some kind of armor plating on his thigh. Yet later on, it's revealed that Boba had none of his armor and only basic weapons and a robe when he saved Fennec. Not only that, but the outfit he does eventually wear when he reclaims the armor is quite different to what we see in episode 5 of season 1. Taking these things into account, the fact that he has different sounding and looking boots as well as different clothing, despite apparently being Bedouin-like with little to no belongings, at this point in the story, it's very clear that he was given a new design that they intended to have him wear for the cameo, maybe parts of his armor that he got back, but later on they decided to have him go on this spiritual journey in the Book of Boba Fett that required him to resign such possessions, creating a clear contradiction in the timeline. Number 3, only TV and movie content matters. If a character has the graces of showing up in a book, comic, or a reference book with any new information, they are almost always not an important character and won't be showing up in any of the TV shows or movies. If a character is created in a book, comic, or reference book, which one of the TV writers likes the idea of, they will adapt them and completely destroy their character and storyline from wherever material they took the character from. If any event whatsoever takes place in anything that isn't a TV show or movie, it will promptly be forgotten and any lingering effects of the event will also be ignored. Cobb Vanth is a perfect example of this rule. He was a fairly popular character from the Aftermath novels created by Chuck Wendig, and these novels played a big part in keeping the excitement building up during the release of the sequel trilogy. Some fans nowadays underestimate just how seriously these novels were taken when they were released. People truly believed the canon promised that all of these books would have a direct impact on the sequel trilogy. When rumours indicated that the actor behind many famous gunslingers, Timothy Oliphant, would be portraying this established character, the hype of fans was through the roof. Then they not only demolished the backstory that the novels had built for him, which is a shame considering the amazing performance given by Oliphant, but his character was also turned into a joke in the Book of Boba Fett, where he also later cheated death, because why not, it's Star Wars. And that takes us nicely to the next rule, number 4, death doesn't mean you died. Death used to mean something. Fan favorite characters dying meant that the story took a huge turn and that something devastating was occurring. Years spent growing up alongside and maturing with characters carried emotional risk, since it was unknown if that character could ever die and be gone forever. Now, we don't like death. It's too mature for children. Just because someone gets stabbed, shot in the head, blown up, or thrown down a reactor shaft, we cannot assume they're dead. That would be so PC of us, so instead we simply pretend they got hurt a little and we'll be back soon. Don't believe us? Just a few of our newly added death characters are Cad Bane, Boba Fett, Cobb Vanth, Echo, Fennec Shand, Ventress, Palpatine, and don't worry if you're afraid that this could ever reduce the attachment people build with our brand content. We've made sure they love whatever we make, no matter how bad it is. It's the Disney way. Number 5, there are 3 silent tiers of canon: screen, print, and reference. Legends had various canon models that are adapted over the years, but its final form was a 6-tier system which became infamous for its complexity, created by Leland Chee, the maintainer of the in-house database at Lucasfilm for all things Star Wars. G canon was George Lucas canon, which included the original 6 movies, his statements, and the things he contributed towards in novels, although original work in novels by authors fell into C canon. T canon was television canon, which housed the lore from the Clone Wars show, and would have included the live-action Star Wars Underworld show produced by George Lucas if it had happened. C canon was continuity canon, containing most comics, books, storylines from games, cartoons, spin-off movies, and so on. S canon was secondary canon, holding materials that could be freely ignored or utilized by authors as they needed, such as the original Marvel Comics run and similar old material. D canon was Detours canon, a tier dedicated to the cancelled animated series Star Wars Detours. N canon was non-canon, which was applied to the Star Wars Infinity series and other what-if content, though also included anything that was contradicted by something on a higher tier, to such an extent that the differences were irreconcilable. Despite the promise from Disney in 2014 that we would have one consistent and cohesive canon in an equal universe of lore, this is simply not the case. We instead have 3 tiers existing, those being screen content, the print content, and the reference content. Much like that old Legends system, it appears that Disney's printed material can freely overrule any of their reference book works, and the screen content is never subject to whatever has been printed, such as in comics or in books, as seen for the example with the Ahsoka and Aftermath novels that we mentioned earlier. There are many cases of this tier system being put to use, so trying to cling on to this idea of one consistent and interconnected canon is hopeless. And at this point, it's honestly sad, especially for a Star Wars lore YouTuber like me. If you aren't making something for the screen tier, your work is as good as non-existent. Refer to points 1 and 3. Number 6, if you theorize and build hype, you have to be excited when the opposite comes true and something gets retconned. Theories based on logic and an expectation of consistency don't matter. You will like what we make, even if it's nonsensical and illogical and a retcon. Because that's why you exist, good consumer. For some reason, this one's a big problem in Star Wars, and especially with Star Wars fans and the creatives at Lucasfilm. If you theorize and then are upset when things don't go that way, you're rightfully called out because the story doesn't bend to your whims and desires. But if you criticize an event or decision because it literally doesn't make any sense and breaks established continuity, you're held as the same kind of child who's throwing a tantrum over the story not aligning. It's one thing to be mad that the writers didn't magically read your brainwaves and write the story, but to bring up legitimate mistakes and errors and be talked to as if you're some kind of toxic idiot is simply damaging to the fandom and encourages a broken, inconsistent and stupid story. When we have fans who are willing to accept such bad stuff being fed to them, it's no wonder that people like Filoni are allowed to consistently butcher things, or people like J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson are allowed to write whatever they want while disregarding George's 6 movies. And look, George doesn't own the franchise anymore. They don't have to follow directly what he would have wanted, but they at least have to follow the established canon that Lucasfilm promised in 2014. And that simply does not happen. And if you call that out, you're toxic. So these have been the 6 rules of Star Wars canon. I've already said it, but I just want to reiterate, this has only been a summary of some of the most notable instances of these things happening, and a full video attempting to explain every contradiction or retcon would take months, if not years, to make. And I'm currently working on a massive documentary about why canon is so destroyed at this point, why nobody cares anymore, and how Disney got to this point and murdered their own canon. So if you want to see that, it may already be out. Check the cards on screen now at the end of the video, or check the link in the pinned comment down below if it's out. If it's not, it'll be here very shortly, and I'm sure you guys are going to love what I come up with in that one. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more awesome Star Wars content, and if you made it this far, type "Thank Mr. Filoni" in the comments down below. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.